Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all see and hear us. If you would like to make sure that your microphone is on mute, if possible, just so that we can minimize any background distractions. If we can background noise, it would be great. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes before we make a start. Good to see so many turned out today on a nice August day. We were worried about lots of people being on holidays, but we know that lots of people will be watching on replay as well. Just give one more minute before we make a start. Okay, I'm going to make a start. I make that 3 minutes past on my clock. So good morning and welcome to ADR's August communication session, which this month is all about bringing people together to talk about skepticism to engagement. How do we get residents to better engage with conflict resolution services? My name is Pamela. I am the newly appointed Growth and Strategy Director for ADR Mediation. I'm here to give my apologies today that Kim, our MD, is unable to attend today. She does give her sincere apologies, and to also give apologies for Kathy Chataway as well. Both have had instances that have pulled them away from being able to take part today. But I do have an expert panel for you to talk about how we increase resident engagement. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. First off, Sharon, at 3 o'clock in the morning from Canada, that is commitment. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I am a legislative ombudsman in the province of Saskatchewan in Canada. So nice to meet you this morning. I have a wide mandate in terms of my jurisdiction, so all of executive government, and that includes our Office of Residential Tenancies, Crown Corporations, health, you name it, we do it, plus all local government. So it's really interesting to see how an issue will dance across the different public entities that we have oversight over.
So thank you. Welcome, Sharon. As I say, that is commitment because it's 3 o'clock in Canada currently. Welcome, Emma, if you'd like to go next.
Thanks, Pamela. Morning, everyone. I'm Emma Goddard, and I'm the newly appointed Head of People Development at ADR. I've worked for ADR for a couple of years, but I've been in conflict resolution across criminal justice and housing mostly for almost the last 2 decades.
Since you were 5.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Katie, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, morning everyone. My name's Katie Swallow. So I'm owner of K Swallow Consultancy, and I'm also co-founder of Connected, which is a domestic abuse app for victims and survivors of domestic abuse with CMSG. My background is also 18 years in social housing, working frontline with victims and survivors of domestic abuse, but also managing ASB cases and helping them with mediation and stuff like that moving forward.
Thank you so much for giving your time today, Katie. It's really appreciated. Claudia.
Hi, so I'm Claudia. I'm a resident in South East London. I'm a social housing tenant, and I'm also the founder of the Campaign for Psychological Safety, which is rooted in ASB and housing issues to do with mold, damp, and all the other things that we see in the press at the moment, having dealt with that myself. So it's a campaign for anyone who is vulnerable and may need to express themselves when it comes to hidden dangers.
Thank you so much, Claude, for giving your time today. So I'm going to be facilitating the discussion today, but I'm also going to be the moderator. So if you do have questions that you would like to pose to any of the panel today, then please do pop them into either the Q&A or into the chat, and we will then pick those up so that we make sure that you get the most out of this session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a series of questions just to help get the conversation started. What I really hope happens is that they naturally lead into further discussions. These are just to help us have a really good session. I'd love it if you could ask questions and give your experiences. as housing practitioners, as community safety practitioners, as conflict resolution experts into the chat so that we can shape this session to really make sure that you get value from it. So I'm going to start off with the first question, which is for you, Claudia. When a resident is first offered mediation or another form of conflict resolution, what are the most common reasons you think that residents are reluctant to engage? Perfect question for you as a resident.
Yes, that was exactly my situation. I think it's definitely because we don't understand what the mediation process is. And in my case, it wasn't necessarily explained. So it was offered as a form of resolution, and that was it. So it was exactly that. You need to do mediation. Now, what they didn't consider is I'd already had a protection plan in place for victim support because of the behaviours. And I also expressed that I didn't think it was conducive to sit in front of this person, especially considering that, to have a conversation. At that point, it would have been great to explain that there doesn't actually have to be a conversation that happens in person. Later on, I did engage with a mediator so they can explain this to me quite far down the line after saying no quite a few times. And when they actually explained it to me over the phone, they explained that they didn't have to necessarily be a conversation that takes place in front of each other. There could be separate conversations, and then we could potentially have someone mediate separately. And that's really important, because that's when I actually realised that, in fact, I shouldn't be scared of this. I'm not being put in a position where it's not appropriate. It's completely different from what I thought. So it starts off in the beginning with explanation, understanding vulnerabilities as well, what's appropriate, and when to actually suggest mediation. So I think that's why people are sceptical, because it's just not explained. And I think speaking to an actual mediator rather than your housing management so they can explain it and be more empathetic to your situation would help immensely.
Absolutely, I think that's really valid. Katie, from your perspective as a housing officer, what do you find is a challenge in terms of that education, awareness and piece?
I think from a housing provider's point of view is again the same as Claudia, is actually not understanding the process. From a housing provider, you say, oh, we'll refer you to mediation, but you don't really get to know what process includes. I mean, sometimes, you may have had training on that, but a lot of housing providers don't really have the training on that. So I think from a housing provider's point of view, it's actually having that training on it to understand the process, to be able to really sell it to your customers, and to really be able to sell it and to not call it mediation as well, because I think that sometimes puts people off, gets people back up straight away, because they're like, no, I don't need to mediate, I'm not the problem, they're the problem. And that's kind of the issue. I don't want to sit in a room with them, I don't want to be friends with them, is kind of what you're told. And without kind of understanding the process, you can't explain that to them. So yeah, I think definitely an understanding of the process would be really beneficial for housing providers.
Emma, what do you, in terms of being that conflict resolution practitioner, you get sort of the other end of trying to make people aware and get them to engage. Is what you're hearing sort of what you see out in the field?
Yeah, definitely. I think housing officers are busy, ASB officers are busy, and I think sometimes that conversation can just be, do you want mediation or not? Because it's voluntary, because it's easy to just say yes and I can get it off my desk, or just say no and we could do something else. So I think absolutely having that time to really dig into what's going to help. And at ADR we don't just talk about mediation, we talk about conflict resolution as a whole package, because not every case wants mediation or is the right approach. And sometimes we can sort of do mediation without calling it mediation and all of those things. So we can, I think it's absolutely about taking the time to understand the need of the person and offering what they need rather than a process that they're going to resist.
I think that's a good time to bring in the resources that you recently created. I say recently because time is going so quickly, it could be months now, around the short training videos that were put together around what is conflict resolution, what is mediation. Those type of resources can be really valuable, can't they, for both housing practitioners and for residents to be able to say, actually, I didn't know shuttle mediation existed, or I didn't know that there was an online version that doesn't need me to be in a room, with these people. So I think those resources like that can be really, really powerful. But I think from what Katie said, there's an element there around partnership working, and rather than it being seen as something that's a handoff. Emma, you said there, get off my desk, rather than it being seen as a handoff, but actually that it's a partnership to actually get better outcomes for the residents. Sharon, is that something that you've experienced? Oh, Sharon, are you still here? I can't see if she's. Sharon is still here. She's just in the chat trying to use computers doing updates. Wonderful. Why does it always do that when you need to be online and live? Do you use trauma responsive principles in the process, empowerment, consent, for example? Yeah, absolutely. I think that the trauma informed approach is definitely something that's becoming more prevalent in the initial engagement stage. Claudia, did you have experience of that, or was it very transactional for in your experience?
Yeah, it was very transactional. Exactly as you said, it wasn't necessarily something that was offered, it was something that was told to me that I'd have to do in order to get to the next stage in the process. So it felt almost obligatory. Again, it's the way that it's kind of explained to you, exactly the same as it's something we're handing off to somebody else. So now it's not that we're dealing with it, you're going to deal with this mediator and they're going to fix the problem. Rather than actually using it as a tool to get the residents to understand each other, to fill in gaps maybe. Again, we have a previous conversation about lifestyle and not knowing what's on the other side of the wall. So it can be very emotional from, for instance, my perspective, hearing noise or being disturbed, or if someone's behaviour is disturbing you, not understanding what they may be dealing with at home. That could be a really good opener. Also understanding what is appropriate. It would have been appropriate for me to have a separate conversation, maybe have a separate conversation with my neighbour, and then they can share information with both of us. And maybe that would have led to us finally being able to speak face to face. But that was never really explained. I think the tools that you have, especially for residents online for training, is excellent. I would have loved that. I would have absolutely loved to see a video which would have explained separately for my housing management what the actual process is. There was no real trauma-informed work or even any conversation around that until I spoke to a mediator who explained everything. And I explained their experience with ASB, and not necessarily personally, but their experience professionally with ASB, understanding that I'm not the only person who goes through this, and also asking the right questions about my vulnerabilities and what I'm going through at home, what my lifestyle is, if I'm employed, unemployed. These questions are so important that my housing management never really asked or really delved into. So I felt a real sense of empathy, and I did start to open up to the idea of actually speaking to the mediator. That was a massive step for me because I was completely closed off from the process. So knowing I'm speaking to someone who has empathy, maybe coming from a place that they may be trauma informed, maybe not necessarily saying that, it's something you do pick up on when you speak to somebody.
Fantastic. I think it's really powerful. And something that's just come out for me there is around case studies. So Emma, you raised your hand.
Yeah, just as Claudia was speaking, and I hope this is all right to share already, Pamela. But one thing that we're looking at in our training packages is adding all of this additional skills and expertise and knowledge into the toolkit of a conflict resolution specialist. So it's not just about can you facilitate mediation process, it's do you understand restorative principles, can you pull in frameworks for nonviolent communication, can you have a conversation that's based on motivational interviewing practices. So we're pulling in all the expertise across the vast expertise we've got across the team in ADR, and we're putting together this very kind of long package that doesn't just say we can train you how to do a mediation process, but it will be, you know, regardless of what's going on for that person, we can teach you how to hold that really safely, really effectively, and deliver the best outcomes based on all of those things that Claudia was saying around trauma informed and those kind of things as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point about obviously the trauma informed. I'm really understanding people's situations from both sides. You know, a lot of the time these cases get sent over for noise nuisance, or, you know, what could be perceived as noise nuisance. Actually, we don't know what that noise is. It's important that it's not just, oh, it's noise nuisance, right, let's send it to mediation. You know, that's important that we understand both parties' side, like what is the noise nuisance? Could it be, obviously with my domestic abuse hat on, could it be that there's actually domestic abuse going on next door, and so therefore mediation or conflict resolution isn't the correct terminology or the correct process for them? So it's really understanding the situations for both sides, for both parties that are involved, to be able to understand if it is the right thing. Because if it's the wrong thing, it's the wrong thing from the start, isn't it? It's never going to work for them because it's the wrong solution for them. So yeah, it's really important to be trauma informed and to know if it's going to help that person, or is it going to make the situation worse, in fact.
I think there's a piece to factor in. I mean, you know, when we've talked about front line, and Katie, you'll have first line experience of this in terms of you've got really high caseloads, you know, you're under pressure. We've got so much legislation now around how quickly things need to be resolved, how we need to report on things, and there can be a danger of wanting to put things in a box, and wanting to, and things to become a tick box exercise. And I think that there's a piece around, as practitioners, being upskilled in not just understanding the process, but actually having that skill set that understands all of that lovely list that Emma just said about, because that is going to drive better outcomes, because it's going to make you more compassionate and make you more focused on the resident, in terms of, rather than it being case management, that it's people management and resident experience. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So my next question is, from a housing perspective, how easy is it to introduce conflict resolution to residents, particularly when someone's already frustrated and wants the organisation to do something? Emma, I'm going to direct that to you, because it would have been directed to Kathy, unfortunately, but I'm going to direct that to yourself. Oh, you're on mute, my darling.
Sorry, I forgot I'd muted. Yeah, so I think that the thing here is that once somebody's asking that question, they're already frustrated. They're already assuming that nothing's going on and that no action is being taken. So some of that, I think, is maybe a little bit around communication. Again, the busyness that we are all feeling as professionals. But I also think what's going on underneath that, we talk a lot in mediation and conflict resolution around positions and interests. So if we understand, when you say do something, what do you actually mean? And I think, do something might initially mean I want them evicted, I want them punished, I want you to take that fence down, or whatever it is, and that's the sort of position that they hold. But what we know is that happens, but that nobody actually feels better most of the time. And so underneath that, do something is usually something like, I just want to be able to sleep at night. I want my children to feel safe here. I don't want my stomach to drop every time I bump into them in the garden. It's those kind of things. And I think once we understand that, conflict resolution as an approach just seems to make a lot more sense. So I think maybe we're asking the wrong question.
Outcome focus. Sorry, I completely overspoke you there. Are you saying to use the outcome focus, and as opposed to the problem focus?
Yeah, I think we're asking the wrong question. I think instead of saying, do you want mediation or not? I think the question we should be asking is, what would resolve this for you? What's the impact on you? If things were different, what would that look like? What behaviours would you see differently? I think if we ask those questions, it feels like we're resolving the problem rather than just ticking the box of we've offered mediation.
Yeah, fantastic. Katie, from your perspective, obviously you've got lots and lots of experience in the housing space. What do you think your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, so I think for me, I think if it's sold wrong from the start, it's going to be really, really difficult to engage someone. So I think you really need to really sell it from the start. And I think Emma's got it like spot on. I think you really need to sell the outcomes rather than the process to them, because if you can say, this can be the outcome of this, what do you want to get out the end of this? Do you want to live together and understand each other and not have this resolution? But it's all about the preventative as well, because all right, the housing provider might be able to stop that instant, that time, but if you don't have the conflict resolution and stuff like that, and you don't actually understand each other, it's going to keep cropping up, isn't it? So if you want to actually stop it this time and also prevent it going forward, I think this is a stronger way to sell it, to prevent the issue from recurring, to really get move forward with it and really prevent any situations occurring again.
Yeah, fantastic. Sharon's just put into the chat a really lovely phrase. Our Indigenous leaders say, show us your heart before you extend your hand. Relational, not transactional. I think that's a really beautiful way of describing it. And I think actually leads really nicely what we've just been talking about to the third question, which I'm going to direct initially at Katie. What language or approaches have you used that have made a difference to engagement?
So I think, again, not calling it mediation from the start, not just being like, oh, well, we're going to refer you to mediation, and not really, not coming across cold, basically, just being like, okay, well, this is the process, we're going to follow it without taking into consideration everything. I think it's really having a discussion with the residents, really understanding what they want to see at the end of this, being straightforward with them as well. If they want to see someone being evicted for making a bit of noise next door, realistically, that's not going to be the outcome. So it's just really making sure that they understand that no, you are going to continue to be neighbours. So how can we, make that be okay for you, and how can we kind of get a good resolution at the end of that? So I think, being able to sell it is actually, what Emma said earlier, is being able to sell the resolution of it rather than the process of it, and really understanding that as a housing provider, you really need to understand the good news stories and everything like that to be able to sell that. I think that's the important part of it.
Again, I think that comes down as well to some of like case studies as well. So being able to show case studies. I know, Emma, you've got some really powerful ones in the ADR membership that, are used by practitioners to say, look, this resident had exactly the same problem as you, and look what conflict resolution was able to deliver for them. So using case studies, using that different language, that can be really powerful. From your perspective, Claudia, would you have anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, I definitely think, again, to mirror what Katie said, it's the way you sell it in from the start. I think that's where my housing management went wrong, is explaining that I have to do this and calling it mediation, and also explaining how much it cost them to do it as well, which was, a pretty bad move. With not even asking if I understand what the process involves, or if I've even heard of mediation before. If someone had approached me and said that they would like to do, for instance, a fact-finding mission, or they wanted to have a conversation with me and then maybe have a separate conversation with my neighbour, or they approached it as, this is something that we're doing so we can come to an understanding. I think that's what I kept trying to reiterate them, that I just want to understand what is going on and why this is happening. So I gave them that cue straight away on what I actually wanted to get out of the situation from them, and they just said, well, do mediation then. So it would have been great if they approached it from the way that Katie maybe approaches it, and sold it in that way, because I would have definitely been more engaged and more open to the idea of speaking to someone about what's happening.
Katie.
Absolutely. I think it's important as well, on the back of that, of what Claudia said, is that you make sure that they know it's an option and it's not forced on them, because once it's forced on someone, people's backs are up straight away and they're not going to do it. Even if you try and sell it and you give them all the good news stories and stuff like that, no, if they feel it's forced on them, then they're not going to want to do it. So they need to know that it's an option and they've got a choice in the whole process, and that it's not forced on them.
So my next question is about good practice, and this one was going to be directed at Sharon. So I'm not sure, Sharon, if you're able to be, because I can't see you on screen and it's muted. But what does good practice look like when a landlord offers conflict resolution during a complaint? We've spoken about, what are the approaches that work, but from an ombudsman perspective, what does good practice look like for yourself? Are you able to come off mute to be able to?
Yes, I had to switch to my cell phone, so, with the broken fingers, but, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So for us, it's about setting the stage. So those principles of empowerment and consent. So we don't start by talking about process. We don't start by talking about, what the purpose of this all is. We don't ask questions. We just talk and build a relationship and a connection. And so time and space is really important to allow the person to have that. And one of the really important things for us, because we have such a high number of Indigenous residential school survivors, is to ask, what's going to be comfortable for you to participate in this process? Are there any barriers? Like, can you tell us? So that's part of the empowerment. We're asking for your input to shape the process. So it's all on the table. How do you want to do this? If you want to do this, you can shape the process. So the one really important thing they'll tell us, a residential school survivor, is I want to sit facing a door. I want to always know that there's an exit that I can leave from. And then I have a whole range of promotional items that are self-care. So I will always have fidgets, sensory items, anything like that that's an active offer. So when somebody comes to my office, if they want me to explain it, I will, but it's just there. And intuitively, people will pick up a sensory strip and start to self-regulate because they know. And then I'll say, do you like things on the table or do you like nothing on the table? Do you like to have a glass of water? Like, do you want a coffee? Like, what do you want? So anything you can do to give the person control over the process. And I appreciate that takes time, but it in the end allows the person to really feel that they own the process and that they've helped design it. And if they've helped design it, they feel that it's going to be a process that works for them. So it's really the really simple things that matter, but it's sort of saying, how do you want to engage on this? So it is a situation, if they've had abuse in their past, they're like, I don't necessarily want to be in the same room with these people. It's really important where I'm seated at the table. So it's really sort of going through that, but really starting with open-ended questions, saying, what will allow you to participate in this process? Assuming you want to, because you know what? You don't have to. It's always your decision. You can walk away at any time. And knowing that, people just feel more comfortable.
I think what you really said beautifully there is around creating psychological and physical safety.
Yes.
Claudia is nodding there. So it is that creating that safe space to be able to engage. That's really, really powerful. Claudia.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say the approach as well of understanding the trauma of the person that you're speaking to, having that prior knowledge is so important, and keeping that in mind. So not just coming from a trauma-informed place yourself and a place of knowledge on what it might look like, but understanding exactly what trauma that person is experiencing and what questions you should be asking. And if you're in a position as a housing personnel or housing professional to know that, that is the biggest tool you have, and doing the kinds of work that Sharon does and offering the kinds of tools that Sharon does is so important. So I think that's where a lot, again, of housing management personnel aren't necessarily trained, or sometimes forget that they have this information to their hand, and maybe before offering mediation, they should be looking at the past of that person, understanding that maybe there's some questions to ask to make sure the person is comfortable, because they'll definitely engage more if they know that you're coming from a place where you really truly understand them.
That's really, really powerful. Anyone got anything else to add to that piece? Fab. Okay, so Emma, one of the responses practitioners often hear is, why should I go to mediation? I'm not a problem. This isn't a me issue. How can we get past perception? And we've already spoken quite a lot about using different language, but how do we get past that perception without making someone feel like their experience is diminished, or putting them on the back foot, or putting them into a defensive space?
Yeah, so I don't think the idea of I'm not the one to blame starts as adults. I think, so I see this in my own house. I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. If they fall out over a toy or what they want to watch on TV or whatever, their sort of immediate priority isn't resolving the problem, repairing their relationship, making friends again. It's absolutely making sure that I understand that they were the innocent party. So they'll come running in, and who started it, who did what, who should be in trouble. And I think at no point are they looking for any kind of restorative intervention. They're just looking for conviction. And I think we see this from parenting in early years. We see it all through school. If you fall out with a classmate, a teacher comes in and rescues you, and the person who's wrong gets punished, and the other person just gets to walk away and have nothing more to do with it. And our legal system reinforces the same that same principle, and I don't think we ever grow out of that. And so I think when we find ourselves in sort of conflict as adults, we get so focused on proving that we're right and we're innocent and the other person is the guilty person. And so we want someone in authority, so a housing officer or the police or the Facebook community or whoever it is. We want them to hear the evidence. We want them to know that we were wronged, and we want them to sort of administer justice against the other person, don't we? And so someone then comes along and says, do you want to take part in mediation? And so, of course, the answer is, why should I? What should happen is that you, as the authority, need to punish the other person, and I just get to walk away and carry on with my day while you stop this horrible behaviour happening to me. And so I think we don't need to get past that I'm not a problem by trying to convince somebody that maybe you are part of the problem, maybe you should have a conversation, maybe it's your responsibility to resolve it. That, I think, feels really dismissive of what they're experiencing. I think instead we need to change that conversation around this. Really, mediation and conflict resolution as an approach is not about blame and punishment. That's a punitive response. This is relational. This is about how everybody's impacted, what the effect is, and that you can maintain control of the process. So I'm not going to come in and investigate and say who's right or wrong and the appropriate punishment. What I'm going to do is help you understand the impact on everybody, understand what's going on, and keep you in control of the outcomes. And I think it gives them the opportunity to have that influence over what happens next, and to protect themselves a little bit more, and potentially repair or maintain a relationship that's important for being able to live in a community peacefully. And I think so that's where that rejection of mediation comes from, and how we can probably kind of hang ourselves around it.
I think you've got a really important point there as well. The relationship side of it with housing practitioners, because beyond if there is a resolution, beyond that there is a relationship still to be had, you know, in terms of between resident and housing officer, not just necessarily, you know, as you know, because you come on my plate because of ASB, but if you're a general housing officer, for example, you can need to have a relationship with that person going forward, and that approach to begin with therefore becomes so important, doesn't it? Is there anything more to bring out on that one? Fab. Okay, you need to not say fab, that's awkward. So the next question, Claudia, was aimed at yourself. I think we've covered this quite a lot, but in case there's something else you want to bring to it, from a resident's perspective, what would make you more likely to trust the offer of conflict resolution? I know we've spoken a lot about language and understanding the process, but you know, what would you need to hear or understand before agreeing to take part? Is there anything we haven't discussed yet that you think that we need to bring?
Yeah, I think it's that word trust as well. A lot of it does come down to how the case has been handled so far. I think that's one blind spot as well as leading up to mediation, what has happened. And if there has been trust that's broken down, I think it would really help for that person to the housing association you're dealing with, to kind of address the fact that you haven't been happy so far, and that they're now trying to get to a point where you feel more comfortable. I think it's that word trust. You won't be trust in the mediators if you don't trust your housing management team. And if you do trust your housing management team, I think a way to get you to engage would be, again, to explain and ask, what do you want to get out of this? And explaining that the whole process is for you to understand what's going on behind that wall or downstairs, and it's meant to understand how it's impacting you and to share information. Again, it's the approach, it's the language that you choose. That would have definitely helped massively, because that's exactly what I was asking for. I was saying, I don't know why this is happening. I don't know what's going on. And it's taking that cue to say, well, that is what we will focus on then. Because maybe my neighbour at the time didn't understand why I was complaining, and maybe reiterating that she doesn't understand the complaint. So I think getting information from both households and only sharing exactly what you can share, but to a point where maybe, in Katie's experience, it may be that there is domestic abuse happening on the other side of the wall, and maybe the perpetrator doesn't understand that you're also dealing with domestic abuse in your own home. And it's having that knowledge and understanding that you have to explain in a certain way that maybe you are going through the same things without disclosing too much, and understanding that you know what's happening in the household, and that it may be a similar situation, and maybe that's where the noise is coming from, or maybe your heightened emotions are coming from the fact that you're dealing with a lot, and maybe normal household noise that's escalated to a point is now making you even more anxious because of what you're dealing with. It's trying to get people on the same page, and I think explaining that it is relational, just like you said, Emma, rather than a problem-solving exercise or a diffusion exercise. It's from the very beginning how you explain it, and then following that person through the process, checking in after they've spoken to the mediators, checking in with both parties and explaining that we're checking in with both parties, so it stays relational rather than just focusing on yourself. It has to be, we've spoken to a person, we've spoken to you, they've spoken to the mediators, this is the outcome. It always seems very separate, which makes it even worse when you start to feel like a victim, when you're only speaking about your problem or only speaking about what the outcome has been for you, and you don't know what's been happening with your neighbour. You don't know if they've spoken to the mediator, if there's been any positive outcomes. So it becomes very separate, even more so. The only way you're going to make someone understand that it's something you're trying to do to connect two people and to get them back on a reasonable footing with each other is making sure that you also explain that this is a process happening with the neighbour as well, and what those outcomes have been.
Fabulous, thank you. And Sharon's just put a really important point here as well. Self-care for mediators is also important. If there's any dysregulation or on part of the mediator is another barrier. I think that actually extends beyond to the practitioners as well. When you've got hefty workloads and cases that are stacking up, and some of them are really complex, really embedded in terms of trauma, that can be really hard as a practitioner. So that self-care piece can be really important, so that you do go into each case with that fresh approach that can be relational as opposed to transactional. Because when you're in a really busy environment, and Katie, that probably works beautifully into the next question, do housing teams and other referring organisations need a better understanding of conflict resolution themselves and their part to play in it, to be able to get better outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it goes back from what we were saying at the start. I think there needs to be some training and understanding about what it is and their part to play in it. It's not just, oh, we're going to make a referral and that's it, not having to explain it, which is what a lot of them do. And yeah, okay, they might have a lot of cases and they will have a lot going on, and there is a lot of pressure and stuff like that. But it's really important to get it right from the start. And if you don't, like we said before, they're not going to engage with me with conflict resolution and mediation. They're just not, because you've not solved it correctly at the start. They feel like it's just a tick box exercise for you, and you're just passing them on to to someone else. You can't be bothered to deal with it, is what they'll think, if you don't get it right from the start. So yeah, absolutely. I think definitely it's important to have some training and understanding for housing providers to really understand their role in being able to sell it, because if they can't sell it, then it's not going to go anywhere, is it? And then it's just going to get worse, and it's not going to be able to be resolved, and it could then escalate, and things could get worse. So actually, if you get it right from the start and you sell it right from the start, then yeah, it's going to make a massive difference, and it could really help people resolve some issues which could escalate.
I think that that does me really nicely in terms of Sharon. Not sure if you can get your phone to be able to work, but where should the line sit between the actively encouraging someone to consider conflict resolution and respecting their right not to participate? Because there is a tendency to, which Emma said about earlier, was I just want them punished. I want them evicted. I want them gone. I want this problem to not be my problem anymore. So where do you think that line sits between encouraging participation and their right not to?
Yeah, I think it always has to be consensual. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective. But I would also work on mindset of the person who's saying that, and talk about growth versus fixed mindset, rigid versus growth, and say, so much of this depends on your mindset. And so what I mean by that is, if you come into it with a set, and I get you've gone through a really negative experience, and it's really hard to see past that and look for a solution. But what you're really trying to do is find a way to resolve this. What's the common interest, right? So that's where I was looking for the common interest. But it's about that fixed versus growth mindset, because if they've locked into this rigid sort of judgment, and way before Ted Lasso, our office uses the line, be curious, not judgmental. And it's so important. It's sort of like, here's an example that I'll give you from a municipal context. So we had this guy who had become so annoying to the municipality, because anytime somebody parked in front of his driveway, even like by an inch, he was really upset, and way disproportionate from the municipality's perspective to what was actually happening. And so we spent some time with him, and finally he shared with me that, I have a special needs child. He's an adult now, but throughout his childhood, I needed to get him to the hospital. And what would happen is people would park in front of my driveway, and I couldn't get my child to the hospital. So even 5 inches, 1 inch is too much in front of his driveway, because he's immediately thrown back to that experience. So I think if you can tell a personal story to somebody who's like really resisting participating because they've had it, this guy's a jerk, they've labeled them, it's over, right? Anytime you can tell a personal experience and access that humane side of the person, you can actually then get them to a place where they can come to the table and listen instead of react. That's the goal, right?
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. In terms of I'm so sorry. You're going to hear background noise from my dog. So sorry. But in terms of as conflict resolution experts, I'm gonna direct this one at you, Emma. It's a bit off the cuff. How? So yeah, she's like, no, not allowed off the cuff. That's not allowed. But how do you think that we can better communicate to housing providers about what we do and what we can do as conflict resolution specialists?
Yeah, something we do for every single one of our contracts is we do a session that's organisational wide that just talks about what do we do, what do we offer. Most importantly, that they don't have to know that in any detail. They just have to know that we exist and we will work out the right approach, you know, given our expertise. We talk about how do we engage people better, and how to get sort of underneath the positions and into the unmet needs and things like that. So yeah, it's certainly something that we offer as a conflict resolution service is that input. We also do sort of drop-in sessions, coaching and mentoring kind of work. We record sessions, we give them access to our membership. So there's lots and lots of supporting resources around. We're not just a kind of a service over here that you can just use if you want to. We're very, very involved in the conversations and in the work and with the people who we're working with as in terms of our contracts.
And it's about being partners, isn't it, as opposed to just a third party consultancy service. 100%. Okay, so the last question before we'll open the floor to questions. If you could change one thing about the way conflict resolution is currently presented to residents, what would it be? One thing. Let's start with Claudia.
I think it should actually, if I could change one thing again, what Katie said is not being described as mediation. That's the biggest takeaway is that would change absolutely everything. And also coming from a place where they're asking what you want to get out of it rather than what they're expecting to happen at the end of this. That would be great.
Fantastic. Katie, what about yourself? What if one thing?
Okay, so I think for me it's the understanding around it and being able to kind of share that with the resident rather than it just feel like a tick box is, being, a lot more thought out, not just that, oh, well, that's the process, we're going to follow it. It's no, like, this is going to work for you. We really feel this is going to work for you. So just making sure the resident knows that it's put in a place of understanding them and understanding what will work for them and not just, well, everyone's got to do it. So that would be the one thing for me.
I see. Emma?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what everybody else has said, really. I think it's about selling the sizzle, not the sausage, isn't it? But understanding what the sizzle is for the individual. And so really getting underneath, we can prove you right, but that doesn't stop you getting, that horrible anxious tummy feeling when you bump into somebody in Tesco. So what is the unmet need for you? And how do we use this approach to get you there?
And Sharon, yourself?
I'm busy feeding my cats because they're kneeling at me, so I don't have anything to add.
Fabulous. Okay. So over to our lovely participants. Have you got any questions for our expert panel here today? Is there anything that you would like to ask or give feedback on? Hopefully this has been a really useful session for you. I've certainly got a lot of takeaways from the session. I'm very conscious that as human beings now that we have response times of 0, don't we? Because we instant click and instant time and actually forget that people need to type or, we're very much instantaneous reactions. So I'm like, oh, there's nothing instantly. So does that mean there's nothing?
Or we've just covered everything, Pamela. That's how I like to sit. When there's never any questions, I think, well, I must have just been very efficient in my deliveries.
Yes, we'll take that. Definitely that should be the feedback. And there doesn't seem to be any questions coming into the chat. So I will say, oh, have we got someone? So really helpful. Thank you. Great stuff. Yeah, lots of thank yous coming through, which is fab. What we will do is we will be putting this session onto our YouTube channel. If you are not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, I would suggest that you do it. Do not bombard with it. We have the communication sessions which we run on a monthly basis, so you can watch on replay. You can share with your colleagues as well. Hopefully this has been a really useful session. If it has been, please do share on LinkedIn your experience, or wherever you'd like to share your experience. We will be starting an Instagram channel very soon as well, because as if we don't have enough to do, we want to be trying to make sure that we engage as many people as possible and as many vehicles as possible. Thank you so much for joining today, and as I say, if you do have feedback, do let us know however you want to get that feedback to us. Thank you to our panel today. Sharon, please go and get some sleep. Emma, Katie, Claudia, and
Thank you.
Kathy and Kim, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks everyone, thanks for having us.
Thank you. See ya.